We're looking at various situations underwater where there is hard cover or structure today and how bass relate to it. My hope is to break down what to look for and the very best spots to search, whether your waters are primarily vegetation or seemingly full of endless rock. Now, whether you are brand new to bass fishing or have been fishing for decades, this terminology comes up all the time. When looking at suggested places for most bodies of water on my deep dive app, I consistently run across the same key similarities which we can see right here. Things like a bluff wall, chunk rock, riprap, and rock transition are all areas that we are suggested to fish and hear about all the time. And when you click on something like this rock transition example, at first you may feel overwhelmed or wondering, okay, that's a lot of shoreline. What am I trying to narrow down? Or one of my favorite examples or areas to fish is a riprap shoreline. Same thing. It can seem endless. So how do we take this information and refine it even more? Well, let's first break down why bass tend to gravitate towards rock, even in waters that are full of vegetation. First, rock is easiest for bass to spot and attack one of their favorite foods, crayfish. This food source is key for bass, and hanging around areas that are likely to have this favorite snack is a good strategy for the fish. And of course, in the spring, finding a hard bottom composition is key for spawning areas. But let's break things down a little bit more. Hard cover or structure also provides fish of all species with what I like to refer to as a solid reference point. This is especially true in waters with lots of weeds and vegetation. We know bass love hanging out in grass, especially largemouth. But those hard spots within a grassy area can be an absolute bass magnet. A rocky area does not move around or wave in strong wind or current. It provides stability, and that's the key. Look at these bass hanging out on a hard spot in a very vegetated lake. Now, this hard area is sand mixed into a soft, weedy, or even mossy type of a lake bed. These bass are moving around, but whenever they get to one of these areas of a harder bottom composition, it definitely holds them longer than an area of just slime or muck. And this hard spot on a reef that is full of vegetation is another great example. There is lots of life here, including this walleye. And take note where the predator is sitting in relation to the distance off of the hard bottom composition. Hard spots in lakes with weeds often pull bass and other predators closer to the bottom. This is another example. The rock dumped in to stop prop wash at a boat ramp. This lake is primarily a soft, mucky lake bed, and the small rocky area here by the boat ramp holds fish consistently, and they will often just roam back and forth right over this rock for long periods of time. It's something different from the vast majority of the lake they live in. Now, let's look at areas that are primarily rock, like highland reservoirs, and how to narrow that down to the best spots in a seemingly endless rocky environment. Once again, this idea of something different is important. That is where the phrase we looked at earlier, rock transition, is key. Transition areas are comfort zones for all sorts of wildlife. These transitions can be looked at as edges, and we know how good those are. A rock transition may at first appear to cover a fairly large area, but you can pick out the most defined transition, the clearest, most obvious place where the rock changes size. Or you could think of it as the most defined edge between two sizes of rock. This is where to start fishing first, and the great thing with a man-made reservoir is often what we see up on the shoreline continues down into the water. So even if you don't have the latest and greatest electronics, you can find a good starting point. A very common rock transition happens where bluff or more vertical banks transition to flatter banks. This is such a good area to find bass, and it's an easy location to figure out if the bass are hanging on the more vertical structure or the flatter areas, because you have both in a relatively small spot. Thank you to the Deep Dive app for sponsoring this video. You can check them out on the Google Play Store, the Apple Store, or follow the link below. And hey, if you would like to watch a video that shows what wave action does underwater and how it can affect bass fishing, go ahead and check this one out right here. And make sure that you go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.